Hello, everyone. I just want to welcome everyone and thank you all for coming. My name is Christina Kusold, and I am the Administrative Coordinator for Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging here at John Carroll University. I just want to thank you all for joining us this evening for our next installment of the John Carroll University Alumni Author Series. The Alumni Author Series was launched in November of 2020 as a way to highlight those who have written books, articles, poems, screenplays, and other written works within the JCU alumni community. Tonight, the Office of Alumni Relations, JCU Alumni Association, the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging, and the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion are proud to partner on this very special Alumni Author Series in honor of Pride Month. And before I introduce our guest author, I want to just share a few housekeeping items with you all. First, we encourage you to view the program in full screen and in speaker view mode. Additionally, I would ask that you please ensure that you stay muted throughout the duration of the program. Following my moderated conversation with Jack, we will have an opportunity to do some question and answer time. In order to ask questions, I'm just going to ask that you utilize the chat feature and send me a chat with your question, and I'll curate that and ask Jack on your behalf. And now it is my honor to introduce you all to Jack Hilovsky, John Carroll University class of 1986. Jack is an actor, a writer, community builder. Born in Cleveland, Ohio, he earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in political science here at John Carroll University and completed a master's at the University of Washington in Seattle, where he settled post-college after spending 1 year with the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Following a fellowship with the federal government at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda, Maryland, he returned to Seattle, where he held positions in public health, community development, and arts administration before deciding to dedicate more time to write. His previous published writing includes Jack's Take, a monthly column about living in the city that appeared in Seattle Neighborhood's weekly Capitol Hill Times, and a monthly column for Mo Magazine, an LGBT periodical. He also shares insights on the Road with Jack, a blog about his spiritual journey and life observations. Jack makes his home in Seattle neighborhood of Capitol Hill. His day job is at UW Medicine in a behavioral research center in the Department of Psychiatry. And I ask you all to join me in welcoming Jack. And Jack, I would love to just start talking with you a little bit about your experience at John Carroll and how the mission of John Carroll really fits in with the narrative that you've told in the book, and what a good reflection it is of how John Carroll can always improve, how we as John Carroll alumni and staff and faculty can always improve on working to push that mission forward. And so there's some things I've been thinking about in reading your book is just the mission of John Carroll being committed to academic rigor, inclusive excellence, and a care for the whole person. And just this idea that we pride ourselves on the apostolic preferences of showing the way to God, walking with the excluded, and journeying with youth and a care for the earth. And I just found that just very poignant when reading your book, just especially this idea of walking with the excluded and journeying with youth, especially in our current times. I know we had a chance to talk before this, and you sent me some articles from the Human Rights Campaign, where currently we have 520 outstanding bills that are anti-LGBTQ bills. And over 200 of those specifically target trans people. And so this has been, I think, such a relevant read for us today. I know so much of the story happens within like the 1970s, 1980s, but it's still so poignant today and still so relevant. So I'd just love to hear a little bit more on your take on that. What are your thoughts?
Wow. Thank you, Christina, first for a beautiful introduction. I'm impressed. Anyway, and tickled to be here. So thank you. and so where to begin? My experience at John Carroll. So I am the product of a Jesuit education, not only at John Carroll, but prior to that at St. Ignatius High School on the Lower West Side of Cleveland. And so I think that the idea of social justice and being a man for others was inculcated in me even before I went to those two schools. But wow, so, and you may have to guide me a little bit here because you did say a lot, but I'm going to try to touch on little things. I think the 70s and the 80s were a very different time in our country and in Cleveland, and we have evolved. And so I want to, be positive and optimistic about how far we've come. We've come a long way. And there's a lot more support, I think, for LGBTQ plus youth than there was, in my opinion, when I was growing up. I had a relationship with a boy, RJ, that I wrote about, and I felt a lot of guilt and shame around that relationship. It was sort of my flowering, my blooming, my coming of age, but I felt like I couldn't tell anybody about it. And that felt kind of sad. And I felt like alone, real alone. And, I had other friends, but like, I felt like I was an actor, pretending that I was somebody else than who I really was. And I hope no kid today needs to go through that, even though there are so many challenges, that some youth face in certain parts of our country, right? And even threats, that they cannot be who they want to be. They can't even talk about who they are. So I don't think I realized until I wrote the book just sort of as a love letter to my youth and, my coming of age and my friendship with RJ and my obsession with Farrah Fawcett, and it was supposed to be, funny and, an adventure, but after I finished writing it, and it was October 14th, 2010. I wrote it in 10 months. It took me another 11 years, pardon me. It took me 11 years to get it published because I had to, edit and expand it and contract it. But there were 3 young men who killed themselves in the fall of 2010. One of them was named Tyler Clementi, and he jumped off the George Washington Bridge into the Hudson River in September of 2010 after his roommate filmed him on webcam, making out with another boy and spread it on Twitter. Yeah. Another young man who lived in Indiana, I was looking up because I wanted to make sure it was the time period I was thinking about. Billy Lucas, he was 15 and was growing up in Greensboro, Indiana. And during the school year in the fall of 2010, he was just being incessantly mocked and bullied about being a fag. And he hung himself in his family's barn. And I just remember finishing my book and hearing on NPR these stories about these young men who had taken their lives, who were young LGBTQ youth, and feeling if my book in any way, shape, or form could touch people, illuminate them, educate them about what it means to be young and LGBTQI, I hope that never has to happen again, even though it continues to happen. We know that young gay and lesbian people take their lives at a higher rate than those who are non-gay and lesbian and transgender. And so I guess that was really important for me to feel like I am somebody who is out there saying, this is who I am, and you can make it. All you need is one friend, right? You need one friend who can save your life. A lot of people don't even have that one friend, whether they are gay or straight, but in particularly, the LGBTQ community. So I do think it's a matter of social justice within the church to address, and at universities like John Carroll, where, going into my story, and I know you're leading a book group, but I felt alone at John Carroll, in the early to mid 1980s, because I knew of one person who was gay in the theater group, and I felt like he was creepy, and that was my judgment at the age of 18. But I felt like if there was a group or a place I could go where there were other gay and lesbian people that were questioning, LGBTQ people, and I could have support, but I didn't see that. And so I felt like I had to continue to hide, and then the AIDS epidemic and HIV made it even more scary for me. So I think opening up and being able to talk about it and have conversations and not have to edit yourself and hide who you are is so important. And that's my hope for John Carroll, is that they will continue to open up and be a welcoming place for people of all different, genders, orientations, religions. It's not just, sexuality, but there's a variety of ways we're all different, right?
Yeah. I think in reading your book, something that we've talked a lot about is this sense of finding belonging, and just seeing the ways as we move through the book, the ways in which you found belonging with your friend group, with RJ specifically, based on that common obsession with Farrah Fawcett. And I'm grateful to see, as a member of the LGBTQ plus community on John Carroll's campus now, I am very grateful to see the strides we've made to feel like I have a place where I belong, and where all sorts of different faculty and staff and students coming from such a broad range of backgrounds and experiences can all find belonging based on one common goal. And so that's just been something that's been at the top of mind as we read this book. And I think it's just something that's really poignant. But I think now is a great time for us to segue in. I know you've picked out some passages from the book that you would like to read. So I want to make sure that we hold space and time for that. So if you want to prepare to read that first section, and then while you do that, I'm just going to remind people that as questions come up, feel free to just pop them into the chat and I'll be able to see them. After Jack reads this first passage, any questions that have come up, I'm gonna try to take some time to ask some of those questions too, so that at the end we're not backlogged with a bunch of questions. So feel free to type those in the chat as they come up. And then Jack, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thank you, Christina. You're doing a great job facilitating, by the way. I appreciate it. So everyone, the first little passage I'm going to read is the shorter one, and it's from my first chapter, A Whole New World, and it's about my experience with my family going to Provincetown. I don't know if anybody's ever gone to Provincetown in this group, but it's a very different experience than Cleveland. And it especially was in 1974 when I was there. So anyway, I'll start off with that. Not until the summer of 1974, 4 years after YMCA swim nights began and following my 11th birthday, did I ever equate same-sex love, attraction, and desire with a graver condition, a reality I would have to reckon with. That August, in our orange VW Beetle, Mom, Dad, and I took a road trip to Boston and Cape Cod. Our love of all things Kennedy resulted in a stop at Hyannisport, where America's most famous Catholic clan summered. I remembered the sad looks on Mom and Dad's faces when Robert Kennedy was killed on June 6, 1968, on the early morning of my 5th birthday. Everything seemed gloomy that afternoon at my celebration, where all the neighborhood kids wore goofy party hats, pointed party hats. While we missed encountering the Kennedys, I fell in love with the Cape's glorious white beaches, the salt-spewing Atlantic Ocean, the hot orange red sunsets, and the sense we discovered something new and different from our own Lake Erie Midwestern habitat. One day, we took a side trip to the artist colony of Provincetown. The streets gleamed with colorful striped flags in red, pink, yellow, green, blue, and orange, all flapping in the light wind. Art galleries abounded. Cottages thatched and whitewashed dotted the red brick paved streets. The Atlantic breeze whistled through our hair. I could taste salt as we strolled through the town center, every open door a portal to paintings of sandy beaches, sailboats, and portraiture. People poured through the streets with popsicles and ice cream cones. That afternoon, a group of towering ladies in high heels and short skirts and wearing outlandish wigs and heavy makeup approached us. My mother grabbed my one free hand, the one without an ice cream cone, and pulled me into a hidden alcove, pointing in the direction of the ongoing Amazons, she whispered, look at those queers. My heart froze. Who, Mom? I responded like I was blind in the dark. Her abrupt pronouncement served as my first introduction to the meaning of queer. Doors slammed and latches locked inside my mind, obscured feelings and desires that had risen in me. Denial. My palms grew sweaty. My stomach catapulted into a free fall. The ice cream cone in my hand began melting, and a bitter taste materialized inside my mouth, suggesting that somehow I was one of them, while not wanting to be. At 11 years old, I knew my math tables backwards and forwards, but I couldn't figure out this frightening reality. Above all else, I craved approval from my classmates, my parents, my church. Though I loved the colorful flags and artistic nature of P-Town, the look and feel of the place, I could now see that up close, these women were men dressed as women. I was not one of them, but somehow we barked up the same odd family tree. They winked and nodded at us, and Mom scowled at them. From that moment on, I chose to conceal my secret awareness that I was odd. Up until Otto and Provincetown, I had never recalled my parents or society mentioning queers or homosexuality, much less equating it with a malady. Even the Catholic priests at our parish never spoke about the subject. It was taboo. Being gay almost didn't exist as an option in Cleveland. I'm not sure what was worse, being ignored or invisible. All I knew was that my desires felt very different and would be an unwelcome topic of discussion at the dinner table or anywhere else.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank you.
I feel like that is a very, I love that you picked that passage, because there was one of the passages that we spent a lot of time on in our book read. And I think when we were talking, a lot of people wanted to know, like, just what were you feeling and what were you thinking, just knowing that this wasn't something that people really talked about. And you're 11 at this time, like that's really, really young to make these, to start seeing the ways that you might be different, and seeing the ways that other people were judged because they're different, maybe not even in the same way that you're different, but like different adjacent enough that like you felt uncomfortable. So I'd love to hear a little bit more, just like what was going through your mind at 11 years old, and like looking back, how do you see that experience as being a formative one for you?
Yeah. I think what comes to mind is just this sense of hiding. I think in the book, I write about how, I was involved like in the Cub Scouts and like, with other neighborhood boys and sports groups, and like, I don't know what it was in the 1970s, but well, boys, they were interested in porn, right? And so I remember like going into the ivy of like Mrs. Knickerbocker's house, where there was a, Playboy magazine that was wrapped up in plastic, right? And they were pulling it out of the bushes and looking at it. And like, at that time, I think that they were showing not only naked women in that magazine, but men. And I was like noticing the men and not the women, right? And so it was like, yeah, I was hiding because I didn't have a choice. I mean, I couldn't even imagine owning up to, that I was interested in looking at the naked men. I mean, even though at that age, boys are curious, right? We're all curious. I just saw, Are You There? God, It's Me, Margaret. I never read the book, but like, that hilarious scene where, the girls are like exercising, and they're saying, we must express our busts or whatever, so we're curious human beings, but like, I don't think I could go there, and say, oh, I like boys, right? And so it was again feeling kind of separate and alone, even though I wanted to be part of the group.
Yeah. Do you feel like maybe that was like the first inclination that you had, that difference would not be welcomed? Or do you think that you kind of knew that or kind of felt that, but that made it really real for you? Or do you think that there was indicators of that earlier?
Are you talking about Provincetown or about the looking at in the bushes at the naked magazines, or both?
I guess a little bit of both.
I mean, even, yeah, I think I always just felt like I was a gentle boy, who wanted to please people. And I wasn't one of those roughneck type boys, right? And so, but I was still, my mom encouraged me to get involved in, t-ball and softball and basketball. I was awful at basketball. Anyway, and I played touch football with neighborhood kids, but like I was just awkward, you know? And so I think I knew at a very young age, as I, wrote about going to the YMCA and noticing the men in the showers, right? And just being curious about their bodies, right? Um, I I knew that somehow I was attracted to boys.
Yeah. One of the questions that I have here, and I think that this is a good time to ask it, is what sort of advice would you give to young people in a similar situation? Or on the adverse side of that, what advice would you give to the loved ones of young people in that situation?
Wow. Well, I think to the loved ones, I just say, I think we need to be open to whatever our child presents as, right? And be very sensitive to their feelings and listen. I saw or heard something on the news the other day, and it might have been involving, transgender care, but it's like, children, I think that it's important to treat children as human beings and as having, agency, right? And yes, maybe kids don't know everything, but I think that listening to your child and being sensitive to your child and their feelings, and not superimposing your expectations on your child, and having them feel like they cannot be who they are because that doesn't uh, that isn't align what you want them to be, and so I think that's a huge thing that parents, some are very good at and others fail at, because their children are basically a reflection of them in their mind. But no, that's not how it is. Each child is their own person and has their own gifts and talents and personality that may be very different from who the parent is,
Yeah.
you know? And so in terms of the child, I think that if they feel like they're in a safe environment, right, where they can share that with their parents, I don't think I don't think my parents would have been able to have gotten it. I mean, as I mentioned in the very first few pages, my dad was 50 and my mom was 43 when they had me, and they were from a very different generation. And in particularly my mom, who grew up with, the catechism and everything much more black and white than, even the church today has evolved on some levels to understand a little bit more of the gray in the world. But I I think that's why I waited until I left home, and why I felt that I needed to get away, because that was the only way, that I could save myself, which sounds so melodramatic, but it's really how I felt.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think as a member of the LGBTQ community, I resonate with that. I think that for many of us, there's a strong desire, even as children, to be seen and heard by someone in our life, and feel like we have some control or some agency. Because I think a lot of times we do know when we're very young, we can sense that there's something different about us. So I think there is often that strong desire to just know that our parents and our loved ones see us and that they hear us, and just to be affirmed and validated in that way. So thank
I,
you for that.
Sure. And I want to just say, I think I was fortunate that I had extended family, including my godparents and cousins, who probably did see me and knew, but like they were not my parents, right? But they were there for me, especially when I came out. And so if you have extended family, I think that you feel safer with them, with your parents, because you're at your parents. If you're talking about a youth, you're at your parents, you're at their mercy if you're living in their house, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I think now we have some more questions for you about later portions of your book. So I think I'd love to transition to have you talk or read that second portion of the book.
Okay.
And then we will talk a little bit about that and wrap up with more questions that have come in through the chat.
Great. I saw a few pop up, one from my classmate, Gary Derlick, whom I have not seen in ages. And
Awesome.
so I'm excited to hear his question, but
Yeah.
my progressive contact lenses did not allow me to read what he wrote in the chat. So anyway, okay. Another problem of, turning 60. Anyway, here we go. Okay, this is from chapter 29, from the top of the chapter. And I have just returned from an 8-day silent retreat at John Carroll. I'm in college, and I'm just realizing I've had a moment in the wilderness, right? And realized, well, you told me you haven't gotten that far, but anyway, spoiler alert, Christine, I've had a moment in the wilderness, right? And I realized that I need to do something to shake up my life. And there's somebody else that wants to get in the waiting room, Julie K. If you want to let her in.
Yeah.
It's popping up on my screen too. Anyway, okay, I'll start. This chapter is called Move On, from the top. Following my experience at the retreat in the snowy wilderness, I sought out a priest at John Carroll in whom I felt I could confide. Father Paul Hennessy, a tall, elegant Jesuit in his late 40s, hailed from Boston and taught religion. He always spoke in honest, direct terms during his homilies at Sunday night services for students within and outside of the Christian life community. Professorial and authoritative, Paul was thought by some students to be aloof. I respected his quiet, thoughtful demeanor. I appreciated how he approached moral quandaries in quandaries society faced, like the US nuclear arms buildup in Europe, apartheid in South Africa, or racism in our own country. Of all the priests at the college, I sought out Paul's counsel because I believed he would be the most open to discussing my newfound insights and revelations. I didn't need or want a formal confession to receive expiation for my sins. I already knew my desires were in no way sinful. I wanted to share my experience with someone wise whom I respected. I wanted to talk, plain and simple. When I stepped into Paul's private quarters, filled with rich mahogany furniture and wall-to-wall paneling, I fell into awe. The surroundings appeared formal, almost judicial, as I entered his office and sat down in front of his large desk. Tall picture windows overlooked the campus quad. My fluttering stomach refused to settle down as I searched for the words to tell him. Father, I came here today to discuss my life, a very personal, private part of my life. I gulped as my throat grew scratchy and my heart raced. I looked him straight in the eye. I've been carrying this secret, but I'm tired of holding it so tight and concealing it from everyone. Paul shifted in his chair. He swept his fingers through a Scottish red beard tinged with flecks of gray. His face looked quizzical, as if he were trying to anticipate the nature of my confession. His eyes narrowed. He leaned in closer to me. I could see the lines settling into his jaw, the white around his temples. I sat silent across from him, almost paralyzed about how to proceed, yet convinced I needed to confide in someone. He cleared his throat. Well, Jack, I know you were on a retreat and had some time to reflect. What would you like to share with me? Your secret, your insights. I smiled nervously and fidgeted with my folded hands. The room felt drafty as I peered out the large windows, capturing the fading light on the snowy quad. I looked into Paul's cool blue eyes. I learned 2 important things about myself at the retreat. I want to volunteer after college in a service organization, whether it's the Peace Corps or Jesuit Volunteer Corps. Paul's eyes looked approving as he nodded his encouragement. The knot tightened in my stomach because this insight was the easy one. Now I have the final whammy to impart. My chest hurt like all my organs were compressing into one final statement of my be-all and end-all. So I leaned forward and said it, half expecting I would explode as I released the words. And my second realization is I have feelings for men. I have feelings for my best friend at school. I concluded this is a part of who I am, how God made me, a blessing, and I need to accept it. I swallowed hard and sank into my chair, a sense of relief sweeping over me. Paul sat back and stared at me in silence. At times, I'd seen him smoking a pipe, and he looked like he had the urge to light one, something, anything, right now, as his eyes darted between me and the molded ceiling above us. Instead, he crossed his hands on top of the desk. The long pause, his vacancy of words, felt interminable. I wanted him to say it would be all right, to trust my instincts, to trust that voice I heard in the snowy wilderness. He sat up straight and took a deep, long breath. I congratulate you for having the courage to come and discuss these matters with me. He sounded so formal. I sat there studying him, only the large desk separating us. For a moment, I felt like I disrobed and was awaiting a physical examination. Except rather than examine my body, I feared he was preparing to examine my moral state, my soul. I sat on the edge of my chair, anxious for what he would say next. You are right to seek out spiritual guidance. I can't condone or encourage your thoughts about homosexuality, since the church has spoken out against it. When I heard his words, my heart plummeted. My ears started to ring. It's unwise to act on your feelings, he continued. They'll only lead to further reinforcement of a behavior the church disapproves. I nodded in shock, feeling the ice creeping over my entire body. I gritted my teeth. I refused to lose the warmth I'd experienced several weeks before, standing in that snowy expanse overlooking limitless possibilities with the sun in my eyes, igniting my soul and reassuring me everything would be all right if I simply abided by the quiet voice within. I felt very alone. Now this man of God told me the church could not condone what I'd found in my very heart and soul, my being. You are all right. You are perfect. I wasn't about to give up on what I knew and held dear. The bells of the grandfather clock in Paul's office began to chime 6 times. Dusk descended, darkening the campus, chasing out the remaining light. I can give you absolution, Jack, and I encourage you to seek out your desire to be of service, but these other desires are destructive. They are unnatural. A sourness, a bile climbed up my throat like when I battled my ulcer. My body experienced an overwhelming urge to spit in disgust. He leaned over me with his big hands and intoned the prescribed words of the confessional absolution. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. But I'd already dismissed him, and his remaining mumbo-jumbo tumbled into the oblivion. I had reached out to Paul hoping for compassion, but I'd received a judgment, a harsh sentencing, that my deepest heart's desire was sinful and destructive. I knew I deserved better. I knew he was towing the Vatican line. He certainly hadn't made the connection that my feelings were a gift from God, a given I couldn't change. I would forgive his glaring oversight. I could see he felt uncomfortable, almost disturbed in my presence. Did I touch a nerve? Was Father Hennessy struggling with his own sexual doubts and feelings? That I didn't know. What I did know is I didn't want or need his absolution. He was insensitive and unaware of his damning words. He didn't understand how intolerance for same-sex love rivaled the sins of apartheid and racism. Thank you for meeting, I said as I rose from my chair. I'm hard-pressed to agree with you, Father. How could a God who created me in love, to love, make me unacceptable? He remained silent and gripped the arm of his desk chair. I left his ecclesiastic stronghold and made my way across the freezing, cold campus. I felt crushed by the encounter and decided I would follow my conscience, a compass the Jesuits taught should guide all Catholics on their moral journey. I would not confide in any other priest what I shared with Paul. I didn't feel safe. I had thought he would see things in a more empathic way. I was wrong.
Thank you. I will admit that I did read ahead to read this passage specifically. And one of the things that that really resonated with me is there is a very Ignatian tradition of finding God in all things. And that passage really spoke to me of like, you just took the time to find God in yourself and to follow that. And had so much respect for that moment of the book of just like leaning into what you already knew about yourself and your own relationship with God, and just allowing that small voice in yourself to speak and guide you. So I really enjoyed that passage, and I thank you for sharing that with us. I do have a question here about this passage specifically. And so the question is, the Jesuits come off looking uncompassionate. Did you have any positive experiences with the Jesuits on campus?
Yes. And in no way did I mean to suggest that all the Jesuits were unempathic. It's interesting because in the book there's another passage about a brother who I believe is was studying to be a Jesuit. I think that he was on his way. Or maybe he's just going to stay. He was just going to stay a brother, but I know that he had studied in Berkeley with the Jesuits, and he taught a class on Christian spirituality and sexuality. And I felt that he was so reassuring to me because he basically, and I can't remember exactly how I stated in the story, but he said essentially that love is love, right? And that we need to treat people as, how did he put it? That people are not things, right? That when you love another person, that they're not an object. And that was something that really stood out to me and stayed with me. Because in college, and especially being in a fraternity, I have to tell you that every day I was hearing about a different girl who was an object to one of my fraternity brothers, and it really repulsed me. And again, to fit in, I just kind of tried to play the part, right? And I wanted something different. And yet, I certainly wasn't seeing by example. And I know, we were young, we were 18, 19, 20, and there's all that bravado, right? But that's not what I wanted, and so I really took heart to what the brother had to say. And that was something that kind of gave me, it was sort of, what would I call it? It was like lifeblood, right? And I kind of held on to that because I knew that he had made it clear that regardless of whether it was opposite sex love or same sex love, love is love.
Yeah. So I know that the book, spoiler alert for those who have not gotten to read it, the book ends before you come out formally.
Correct.
So one of the questions that has come up during our book read was, okay, but what happens next? Will there be a second part to the story? So if you want to talk a little bit about if there's any like volume 2 in the works, or if you just want to share a little bit about what came next.
Sure. Just briefly, I mean, when I was part of a very small writers group. It was just myself and two other women whom they're both dead. I dedicate the book to them in addition to other people. But they felt it was very important for me to have an afterword or something that let people know that I did actually come out at some point. So, that happened in Seattle my first year or so while I was there. I was still struggling with it, but, I, made an attempt to come out to my parents that year in the JVC when they came to visit me. It was not easy. uh, so there is, and then there was such a beautiful response to the book. And literally yesterday was the 1-year anniversary of its publication. So it's just been such a journey, receiving so much support. I always tell people, I know I'm not Ernest Hemingway or John Steinbeck, but everybody has to start somewhere. And I like to write about what I know. I'm not a person who wants to do all this research and write something that happened in 1862. Yeah, I want to write about now or the recent 40-year past. Okay. Anyway, so I have started writing a, part 2 as of earlier this year, just because I felt like I had more to say. I thought once I published this, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I'm done. It's been 12 years. I can't do anymore. I never want to write a book again. But my writers group convinced me, and several people who said that they were really touched and that they encouraged me to keep writing. So, yeah.
Well, I'm really glad to know that there's a volume two and everyone will get to know or get a little bit more insight into what happened next.
Hopefully it won't take 12 years, Christina.
We're hoping not. We're hoping for a more streamlined process on that one. And then I'm going to ask you one more question, but I want to just give people a chance to, if you have any more questions, if you want to drop them in the chat, can you drop them to me specifically? And I can make sure that those questions get asked to Jack.
And Christina, I also want to say, while you're giving people that invitation to drop more questions, I'm really interested in hearing about other people's experiences in college, at John Carroll, if they struggled coming out. Was their experience similar to mine? Was it different? Were they, hiding? Were they out as loud as a pride flag? I mean, because it's different times, and I'm not sure who's in the audience, and different generations are different, but I want to hear from them, and so that this is a true dialogue, cool.
Yeah, if anybody wants to share or feels called to share, please drop me a message in the chat and we can unmute you so that you have a chance to share. So just let me know. But I am a John Carroll alum of 2017 and 2020. So I can talk a little bit about my experience on campus, which was probably vastly different than your experience on campus. I think John Carroll's campus now is a more welcoming space for our LGBTQ students and staff and faculty. I have the honor of facilitating the Q at JCU Employee Resource Group, which is a group for queer faculty and staff on campus. And so I would say that just in general, my experience with John Carroll has been a very good one. I think a lot of the language that I needed in order to come out, I got from John Carroll. And so that has been a really good opportunity for me to learn more about myself and to come to terms with where I was on both the gender spectrum and the LGBTQ plus spectrum. And so I think John Carroll gave me the time to reflect on who I was as a person, and it gave me the language to express that to people around me.
When you say the language, Christina, I'm just curious what you mean by that. Was that through like studying psychology, sociology, or just having, conversations?
I think it came more from just interacting with different people and getting to learn more about the other parts of the world and what other people go through. I grew up in a very conservative household where like the language for the LGBTQ community just wasn't there, wasn't something that we talked about. So I didn't have the language to express it. I really resonate with pieces of the book where you talked about knowing, like having that innate sense that you were different. And I think that I had that a lot when I was younger. I just didn't have the words to really express that or flesh that out. And so going to John Carroll and getting to interact with people who didn't have quite as conservative background as I did, who were more experienced and who had better language than I did to express themselves and had done more reflection. It gave me the opportunity to learn that language and do my own self-reflection to decide where I fell on that spectrum. And it was very helpful.
Nice.
I'm not sure that like I would have gotten that without a higher education experience.
Beautiful. I'm glad it was different for you.
Yeah, and the goal is to make sure that it continues to be different for students and staff and faculty now. There's always room for growth and there's always getting better. So I think that's what our goal is now. We want everyone who steps on John Carroll's campus to find some sense of belonging, so that they can become the person that they want to be.
Beautiful.
I'm not seeing any more questions on my end. Jack, do you have any questions on your end that are coming in maybe to you?
Oh, I'll take a look. I'm going to pour myself a little water. I've been getting over a little bit of a cold and okay, let me look. I've got 9 listed here. So I'm going to, because I'm wearing progressive contact lenses, I'm going to like show chat. Hold on. Okay, here we go. And I know my cousin has some questions for me. Okay, so let's go here. Okay. Okay, here's one from Christine. I hope you don't mind, Christine, that I'm naming who sent the question. Okay, I'm going to just read what she says. If we as parents do our job well, then our children will feel empowered to forge their own path and find their true way. As a proud parent, what can I do to best support my child and her friends as they are facing attacks from so many directions? I was so sad and disappointed in Father Fennessy as I read this scene. Okay. There was a little reveal there in the book. It's Father Hennessy. But anyway, Christine. Anyway, okay, not everybody's dumb. Okay, so as a proud parent, what can I do to best support my child and her friends as they're facing attacks from so many directions? I think just every parent should be available to their kids to listen. And I do believe particularly my mom was available to me. She was a stay-at-home mom. She was very interested in my development and well-being. And, there's a point in the book when I'm getting bullied, at St. Angela, Merici, where I went as a, in middle school, and she took me down to Cadell, in the inner city of Cleveland, boxing lesson, right? So, Christine, I'm not saying that you should take your daughter to get boxing lessons, but anyway, I think that listening, being available, and I think just supporting your daughter in terms of her choices and not trying to make all her choices for her. I think kids sometimes need to make mistakes, right? And we're there to pick them up. And so yeah, it's not always going to be easy. I think social media today is that's a tough one because we didn't have that, when I was a kid, and so that would have been, I mean, some kids are bullied on social media, and, there can be competition and there always is competition, but I just think that being a good role model, leading by example, doing what you say you're going to do, not just, do what I say, but don't say what I do, whatever, I mean, all those, they're very, tried and true. And I think just the very reason that you're concerned, that you want to be supportive is, a strong sign, but as your child may not be the person that you are, I mean, they may choose different paths or make different decisions, but to just always be there to be available, right? And have those conversations, I think is the most important thing. I hope I answered that question good. I'm just like, okay, I'm going to keep going. And Christine, feel free to ask, more or come onto the video. Okay, here's another one from my classmate from St. Ignatius, Gary. Very proud to know a published author. I was sorry to read of some of the challenges you faced in high school. What do you think would have helped at that place and time? Best wishes. Wow. Gary, I think having a support group at Ignatius, and I think there's something like that now, that the president who graduated the year behind you and I, and who's an incredible, leader, Ray, Gio, I think there's some sort of a group that is there for kids who are like not, whether it's kids of color or kids that, identify in a different way. I just think that it would have been nice because I just felt like yeah, there wasn't anything. And the counseling, I think there's a lot more counselors at Ignatius now. And I'm not sure if that's the case at John Carroll, Christina, but like, I just think that the counselor that I had at Ignatius was clueless. And I think she was a closeted lesbian. And so that did not help me. Okay. And so I was called a loner. I was basically, pigeonholed, and, it kind of left a bad imprint on me because I didn't feel like I was a loner. I felt comfortable in my own company, but I felt that was a label that was unfair. And so I think that now more than ever, right, it's post-pandemic, having mental health counselors for kids in high school and having that available in college is paramount. We all go through a lot of stresses. Some of it isn't coming out, but it could be a whole host of other things, whether it's, alcohol or substance abuse or sexual assault or, bullying or whatever. So anyway, thanks for asking the question, Gary. And another question from Jim Jack, since you came out after John Carroll, do you now, or have you kept any relationships with friends from JC? If so, what is the nature of those relationships? And Jim is from the class of 66, and he kept it hidden all through John Carroll and for years after. Wow. Okay, Jim. Yeah. So you know what it's like. I have kept friendships. I just spoke with one friend yesterday from John Carroll over the phone, and we talked for an hour. Several of the characters in the book, including Stephen, and Julia, who I introduced and later married. I didn't marry them, but they got married to each other. Anyway, I'm trying to think of other characters that I was in touch with. Two of the fraternity brothers, actually, who have different names. So I've been to 3 Carroll reunions, my 25th, my 30th, and my 35th. So I hope to go to my 40th, which would be in another couple of years. So yeah, I still have a relationship with John Carroll and with some of my friends. And so I don't know if any of them have read the book. They want to. Some may not know. Well, they must know that they're in it. But anyway, I hope I answered that question well, Jim. Here's one from Mark. Okay, so Mark graduated 5 years after me, and he's a faculty member. My oldest is trans and youngest is gay. Oldest and second are both starting at JCU in the fall. After a bad experience prior to being out, my oldest was hesitant about coming to JCU as trans, got them a job this summer on campus where their supervisor is a gay man, and took that person on second day of work to a queue at JCU lunch. This is a very different space, still a ways to go, but certainly more open. That's great news, Mark. And yeah, having a friend or a mentor, like I said, when I first got to JCU, there was just one person who was, their personality was just such that they were, kind of cynical and a little bit, untrustworthy. And I just felt like I didn't know, I was scared and I just didn't want to be gay. And there was AIDS, and I have a whole host of excuses. I think that if I had gone to, and this is another thing, I think that I went straight from St. Ignatius High School to John Carroll University, and there were about a dozen boys that were in my graduating high school class that were freshmen, and I don't think that was good for me. I think it would have been better had I gone to a university where I could reinvent myself. And I think I felt a little bit too known. And I think that's one reason why I pledged the fraternity too. It's funny what you learn about yourself when you write a book, right? So anyway, so thanks, Mark, for that encouraging words about the fact that Carroll is continuing to change. And then Jim came back and said, Christina, what is the attitude of the Jesuits at John Carroll now? And then Helga said, not a question, but I will fight you on Kate Jackson. She was the best angel. Okay, Helga. I have my scrapbook. I have some pictures of Kate Jackson in it too. But anyway, I will always be true to Farrah. And Jim said, thanks. Anyway, I don't know if you want to open it up to, I feel like I'm having a conversation with a box and just you, Christina.
Okay.
So maybe that would help to open it up and have more of a dialogue or not. I mean, I know my cousin Rebecca probably has some questions, but please, people, if you have other questions, I'm really curious and I want to hear about your experiences at John Carroll.
It looks like I do have a question that just came in from Mike. Mike, do you mind if I allowed you to unmute and you can ask Jack your question? You can let me know, and then questions are starting to come in, so I'm going to go ahead and allow people to unmute. And
Okay, and I'm holding this so I can see words. Okay.
yeah, so if I've asked you to unmute, feel free to go ahead and ask Jack your question.
Okay, I think you did. Can you hear
Hi,
me?
Mike.
Yep.
I can hear you, Mike. I can't see you, but I can hear you.
Oh, I don't think I think my video is
Oh, it's
still
locked?
frozen. The video is blocked. Yeah.
Oh, it's locked? Okay, can we unlock it, Christina, or is that too
Doesn't
hard?
matter. Oh,
I think only Eric can unlock it.
Because it
But
feels
they can
more
at least
personal.
ask their questions.
Okay, great. Okay. Go
well,
ahead.
I'm 68 grads, so I have 68 grads, so I have a lot of gray hair, a lot of
Okay.
wrinkles.
Oh,
Nothing to see here. But
okay. We've got a great voice.
yeah, the question I have is, let me just read it since I wrote it out. The intolerant in our society want parents to believe gay people are a danger to their children. Every gay man I've ever talked to, including one of my best friends from work, stress that the last thing they want to do, the very last thing they want to do is seek out a gay relationship or flirt or whatever with someone who is straight, regardless of age. I just wondered, what's your personal experience or viewpoint on this?
Well, it's funny because I think I drank that Kool-Aid as a kid and somehow, got in my head that, if I came out, all these older gay men would be after me, right? And that, and I sort of had one experience right before I left to move to Seattle in the summer of '86, where I was working as a waiter. And I don't know how it happened, but this fellow, engaged with me, and I ended up meeting him at his house and realized that he was like married, and he was chasing me around, and it was the freakiest thing. I left, I got in my car. I mean, but that was such an isolated example, right? And I agree with you that, gay people do not want to have relationships with children. I mean, yeah, there was Michael Jackson, but I mean, it's not. I don't think that's the way it is with most gay people. They do not think that way. I mean, there are some people who are not emotionally mature and they haven't grown up, like Michael Jackson, and they're caught up in delayed development. But I think that is such a fallacy, and it's a way to spread fear, and we need less of that. We need to be truthful and just say, it's like saying all priests that molest kids are gay, and most of them are not. The truth be told. Anyway, enough pontificating.
No, thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike.
And then Tom, I gave you the opportunity to unmute if you want to share, but no pressure.
Okay, thanks. And this is more of a comment than a question, so I hope that's okay. But I'm from the class of '93, and I came out in grad school after I left JCU. Like Jack, I also came out to a priest for the first time, and he was assigned to the student parish, and he used to preach that you are the beloved of God. It doesn't matter if you're male or female, black or white, gay or straight. And I heard that and I thought, wow, did he just say that from the altar? And it was pretty cool. It really made an impression. It was the first time I actually felt comfortable telling someone that I was gay. So it's
Wow.
it can make a difference.
It made a difference for you.
It sure did. Yeah.
I'm glad that you had a positive experience and that that stayed with you.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm seeing 2 comments pop up in my chat box, Christina, so I'm just going to look here.
Yeah.
I'll just say that again, my classmate from high school, Gary, said his wife is a JCU grad 5 years after me, and she thought that John Carroll was very homogenous. She knew a lot of the people who were materialistic and fake. That part of your book resonated with her. Gary's wife did an 8-day silent retreat, which was a real challenge. She ended up going to the Peace Corps and served in Paraguay. Wow, that is so cool.
Yeah.
Gary, thank you for sharing that.
All right, we have one question from Rebecca. Rebecca asked, how has writing this book and sharing your story helped you grow as a person?
Thank you, Rebecca. I think that writing this book and sharing my experience has, I'm going to put this down. I'm like holding this laptop because I thought I had to read something on it. I think it helped me be more compassionate toward myself. Could you read the question one more time that Rebecca sent?
Yeah. She writes, how has writing this book and sharing your story helped you grow as a person?
I think compassion toward myself, because when you write your story, you really, it's like reliving it again. And, you realize what you didn't know then that you know now, right? I mean, I literally wrote this book like 35 years, 40 years after it all had happened. And so it's quite a experience to relive it that way. And, then sit with it. I think it has helped me. I think I've always been an empathic person, but it's interesting. And maybe this is a time to share this. I was taking a walk yesterday, and I was listening to music on my pods, or in my ears. Anyway, I passed this woman who was approaching me, who was on her phone walking toward me, and she looked so pained in her face, like she was literally going to cry. And we passed right at that moment when I could just see that pain on her face. And I felt so connected to her, and I just like crossed myself and blessed her. And I said, please, take care of her, because I could feel her pain. And maybe more recently in the last month or so, I had a really good cry, like in early May, first time in a while. And it was related to a whole host of things, including just the pandemic and all we'd been through. And I'd lost 2 elder friends that were sort of like on their way out already, but, still, and mourning my parents who died, 20 years ago. And it was just so cleansing to have that cry. And then I think it kind of just realigned me on an emotional level to realize that, we all carry pain, and have rough days. And, some of us hide it. Some of us deal with it through, distractions. And sometimes the best way is to just feel it, right? To let yourself feel it. So that young woman was just a reminder to me, to feel your feelings, right? To not hide from them. And so I think the book allowed me to start going back and feeling some of those feelings, in addition to good ones, happy ones. I mean, when RJ and I are disco dancing, right? With our friends, when it's 1976 and 77, or, when I pledged the godforsaken fraternity, like, what was I thinking? But they were also cute, right? I mean, I wanted to fit in. I wanted a brotherhood, right? And yet there was all the weirdness of like, paddles and, people being humiliated and, Hell Week and all that kind of stuff, right? being a lifeguard, and conquering a fear of the water because I nearly drowned when I was 5, right? So just feeling the feelings. And I'll just say this too to top it off with Rebecca's question, but maybe, I don't know, in the fall I had a neighbor who knocked on my window, and I live overlooking a beautiful courtyard with a fountain and pond. And a neighbor knocked on my window, and she said to me, "You lived a charmed life." And the window wasn't really cracked, so I could hear it. And I cracked. And I said, "What?" And she said, "You lived a charmed life." And I'm like, she said, "I read your book." And I'm like, "Oh." She said, "You lived a charmed life." And it's amazing how thinking about your life from somebody else's perspective kind of gives you a new insight. So things that I thought were, whatever, painful or, so, I mean, I kind of carry that with me that, I have a significant other who was on his own when he was 15 and a half years old because, his dad was an alcoholic, and, roughed him up, and Child Protective Services took him away from his father because his parents had split, and he was working on his own, and like, that didn't happen to me. There were other things that happened, but we've all been dealt our deck, right? And I'm going to choose to believe that my basic needs were cared for. I wasn't abused. I wish I was better understood, but we take what we get, and then we have to work on ourselves and hopefully emerge on the other side and forgive and let go and not hold on, right, to what we didn't have.
Yeah.
Anyway, I hope I'm not sounding like I'm sermonizing, but that was part of the answer to the question.
Yeah. We do have Rebecca wants to make one comment here, so I'm going to ask her to unmute, and then after that we are hitting time, so we'll wrap up after that.
Excellent, Christina. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you, Christina. Thank you, Jack. I just wanted to say that I think one of the hardest things for all of us as humans to do is to honor your truth. And so I just want to say, Jack, I'm very proud of you for finding the courage to honor your truth, and the others on this call who also shared their stories and honored their own truths. So thank you for allowing me to participate tonight. This was very nice.
Thank you for coming, and Lindsay too. Rebecca and Lindsay, Christina, are both graduates of John Carroll. Rebecca in 2001, and Lindsay, her sister, who I believe is on the call, in, I want to say 4 years later, 2005.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm going to say one other thing, because if it had not been for Rebecca, I believe that I may not have gotten published. And I'll just be very brief because there's another person on this call, Christopher Dragem, I believe, who led me to my publisher, but Rebecca led me to Christopher's book, which she sent me for Christmas in 2019, I believe. I read, got in touch with Christopher, realized that he graduated from Carroll 5 years after I did, lived in Seattle, had just moved away in the summer of 2020, but we struck up a friendship. I read his book, my book group, and had a Zoom meeting with him and his mom. He continued to be very supportive, eventually gave me the name of his publisher. I contacted them after getting, I don't know, only 12 or 14 rejections. Some people get 100, so I was lucky. But, Mark from, No Frills Buffalo Press Publishing in Buffalo, New York, liked what his editor read. And so he said, we'll help get you published. So thank you, Rebecca, for making that connection to me and Christopher.
Awesome. Well, Jack, I know we are hitting time, and I want to respect our time frame, but I really want to thank you for taking time out of your evening to be with us today and to share your story. I know it has been a really powerful and impactful story for not only John Carroll staff and faculty, but other alums, and we're really fortunate to have you as part of the John Carroll community. And yeah. And then for everybody else, no, Jack, you were saying.
There was one, no, I was just going to say there was one little question in the chat from Christine Horwath, which was, what inspired you to decide to share your story after all these years? And I just want to say it was the death of Farrah Fawcett. So that comes full circle. When she died in June of 2009, I couldn't believe it. And I was just like, wow, I feel like a part of my past is gone. And it just got me thinking about my adolescence and the fun that I had, with my friend RJ. And so 6 months later, I started writing it. So Christine, I hope I answered your question. And Helga says, thanks, enjoying the book and the discussions we're having around it. Thank you, Helga. I appreciate that you're reading it and that you're participating. Anyway, thank you, everybody. It's been a real honor. I was nervous as hell, but it wasn't too bad.
Yeah, I want to thank everybody for joining us. I really hope that you enjoyed the conversation. And for those of you who have not yet read Jack's book, I really would encourage you to buy the book. It's available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and you can also get your local bookstores to
Yes.
order the book.
Apple Tree Books at Cedar Fairmount, and also the bookshop in Lakewood, right there, I think, on Detroit. I'm just putting a plug in for them because they both ordered it and have copies if you don't want to buy from Amazon and support a nasty big business. Anyway.
Yeah, definitely. If you have the means, support your local bookstores so they stay around.
And I've heard Jeffrey is trying to get it into the Cleveland Public Library. So thank you, Jeffrey.
Yeah, so definitely, if you haven't gotten a copy of the book, definitely do so. I really encourage you to do so. But I just want to thank you all again for being here, and I hope you all take care, be well, be safe, and as always, onward on John Carroll.